I've enjoyed doing this sermon series. But I'm not going to lie, this last one I saved to last, not because I felt like it was the climax. I saved it to last because it's a little bit more divisive than the rest. All of us, especially those of us who have grown up in the church, have had interesting relationships with Ellen White. There's an entire spectrum of people within the Adventist church who have differing beliefs on Ellen White. And if we want to talk about things that make us seem different, Ellen White's at the top of that list. Because here we are claiming to have a prophet. It's often easier to just not talk about the spirit of prophecy. But if we're going to talk about our 5 distinctive doctrines, it's one of them. And so here we are. We're going to be talking about this through the lens of one of Jesus' parables in Matthew 21. I love Jesus' parables. I love the fact that Jesus' primary method for teaching was storytelling. Stories have this beautiful way of connecting, regardless of what age, regardless of your background. We all connect with stories. That's why I'm always excited when Doug Taylor is doing children's story, because I know someone's probably going to come close to dying. But it's going to be a good story. But Jesus' parables all have something unique, and that is there's a surprise in all of them. It's a regular story, but then there's this one element that just doesn't fit, and it catches the people off guard, and this is where the parables pack their punch. Think of the lost sheep. And the way we often think about that is, well, he takes the 99 home and he's counting them as they go in, but that's not how it happened. When Jesus tells the story, he leaves the 99 in the field to go look for the one. That doesn't seem like good shepherding. We think about the sower. The sower who threw the seed on the path. I remember as a child, had I been tasked with sowing and I was throwing seed on the path, my father would have talked to me about that. Pay attention. Look where you're throwing the seed. The seed doesn't go on the path. It doesn't go on the rocks. So the secret to these parables is often found in the unexpected. And here in Matthew 21, we have the parable of the wicked tenants. There's a man. He built a vineyard. He put a tower in the vineyard. He put a beautiful wine press. He put a fence around the vineyard. It was a beautiful vineyard. And he builds it and he gets it just right. And then he leaves. And he leaves it with some other people in charge. I don't know about you, but it makes me nervous when I have prized possessions leaving other people in charge. I like photography. In fact, my camera is worth more than my car. And it's not because my camera's that expensive, but my car this year officially became a full adult. 21 years of age. But I enjoy photography, but I'm very careful with my lenses and with my camera because they're fragile. And so when my boys came along, I wanted them to get into photography too, and I did not, because I wanted them to get into photography, hand them my camera. I found some used cameras that were absolutely bomb-proof. They were freeze-proof, drop-proof, like waterproof, absolutely everything-proof, and they were $5 each, and I was like, yes, let's get them into photography. Because when we have things that we care about, we don't just want to hand them over to someone else. But the owner of the vineyard does that very thing. He creates this beautiful vineyard, he gets everything just right, and then he leaves. When it comes time for the harvest, he sends a servant back. And here in Matthew, it says, "But the tenants seized his slaves and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. Again he sent the slaves more than the first, and they treated them in the same way. Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, 'They will respect my son.' But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, 'This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and get his inheritance.' So they seized him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. Now, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants?" Jesus tells this. And the listeners there, they're all in. And they said, "Yeah, he's going to throw him out." It's like they didn't realize who Jesus was talking about. It's like they didn't know their own history, because you see, he had sent his servants, the prophets. Isaiah, they sawed him in half. Jeremiah was beaten, imprisoned, and thrown into a well. Zechariah was stoned on the very steps of the temple. They had done those very things to the prophets that God had sent. And now God had sent his son. And as they realize that Jesus is talking about him, what do they immediately do? Exactly what he said they were going to do. They start planning his death. Because they didn't realize Jesus was talking about them. We're good at that, aren't we? We're good at hearing sermons, hearing messages, seeing things in the Bible, and figuring out how to apply that to those around us. We're good at hearing these things, and we know the right answer if it applies to them. But when Jesus said, no, guys, I am the stone the builders rejected. I am the cornerstone. And all of a sudden they realized what he was actually saying. They plotted his death. You learn in this story that the way we treat God's prophets is the way we treat his son. Why send messengers? Why does God send messengers at all? Sends messengers because he loves us. He wants to talk to us. He wants to maintain his relationship with us. I remember years ago when I was living in Loma Linda. I went to the store to get something. I don't even remember what I was going to get, but what I do remember is what I came home with was not what I was supposed to get. I don't know if I have ADD. Well, I do know, but I don't want to talk about that. But I get distracted at times. And as I was walking through the store, they had some puppies. And there was one. He was white. He was fluffy. He was tiny. And when I picked him up, he curled up right into my shoulder. Who could say no to that? And so not only did I come home with a puppy, I was told that his name was Poe. But I'm going to be honest, living in Southern California, going out and calling Popo in no way seemed wise. So I called him Edgar Allan. Seemed appropriate. Eddie for short. And so I came home not only with Eddie and food for Eddie and a crate for Eddie, and it's a lot. And Eddie was awesome. Eddie loved playing fetch more than anything. Like, I kid you not, you would open your eyes in the morning and he would be there and drop a tennis ball on you. He's like, okay, let's go. And if I was sitting at the table trying to work on something, he would take a tennis ball and he would shove it under my leg. And he would say, okay, throw it. It was terrifying. One time in the Sierra Nevadas, I went backpacking and I took him along and I accidentally kicked a rock off the edge of a cliff and Eddie was ready to go get it. Eddie was an awesome dog. And what I liked about Eddie also is the fact that I didn't have to pay anyone to sit him if I had to be out of town, because I had church members who literally fought over who got to watch Eddie. And then I started dating Brianna, who is allergic to dogs, cats, horses, ponies, possibly goldfish. And it was an easy choice to make. Eddie or Brianna, it was easy. And I had some friends who were both dentists. And I promise you, Eddie had a better life than I ever will. And they sent me a picture that they had an oil painting made of Eddie. They did not have one made of me. But the thing is when you love someone, you will do anything to have a relationship with him. And so the God of the universe, he loved us so much, he sent prophets because he wanted to maintain the communication. He wanted to talk to us. He wanted absolutely any way to communicate. Unfortunately, I told this story of Eddie at a Pathfinder camporee once many years ago. And it went horribly wrong. I did not take time to think about my audience. Because 10-year-old boys would not choose a girl over a dog. And the rest of the weekend, they reminded me that I made the wrong choice. My poor wife, who was with me, a boy sat next to her in a meeting and looked at her and said, "I would have chosen the dog." And none of that was as painful as the youth director. I don't think he fully thought through what he was trying to say, but he stood up in front of everyone and said, "Remember, kids, Pastor Ben doesn't need a dog. He already has a wife." And I share this story because when it comes to prophets, sometimes we get lost in the weeds. Sometimes we get lost with our own feelings, our own experiences, and we miss the point. Just like the hearers of this parable, they were so busy trying to apply it to other people that they missed the message that God had for them. We do the very same with Ellen White, which is part of the problem we've gotten ourselves into. We're really good at reading and finding what Ellen White says about you. Here's a message for others. But what if we started reading her books, and instead of looking outward at what other people were doing wrong, what if we read her words and said, "What is God saying to me?" I feel like if we did this, we'd get back on track. God didn't send his prophets so that they could be messages from us. He sent his prophets as messages to us. There's a difference. When I was asked by Fernando Ortiz what my favorite book was, it wasn't difficult. It's Steps to Christ. It's Steps to Christ because at least once a year, that book does a number on me. You see, when something is going wrong, when things are off the rails, when I'm so upset and I'm sure that I'm right and the other person is wrong, I read Steps to Christ because there's something about that book that as I read through, and it's different every time, I realize no matter how right I might feel, there are things I need to change. And that book calls me back to God over and over again. I don't know what your experience has been with the writings of Ellen White. In a group this large, there's been a variety. I'm sure some of you have been hurt by her writings. I'm sorry. I'm sure some of you have decided it's easier to dismiss her writings. But my advice for you review, how do we know if a prophet is truly from God or not? And then read our writings, taking a look at your own life. Years ago, when I was still in college, we did an evangelistic series on the other side of the world. And I have to apologize, the adventurers have already heard this story, but you're just going to have to deal with it. And every day the elder would come and pick me up, and he would drive me the windy mountain roads to Limuru. And as we would drive up, it was an exciting trip. Because what you realize when you go to other parts of the world is that the traffic laws that we appreciate here are not as enforced in other parts of the world. There were no lines on the road, and I don't know if it would have mattered if there were, because people drove on whichever side they wanted to at that moment. There were no stop signs or speed limits. There are also sheer cliffs on one side. But not only that, there are also people and animals on the roads that we dodged and avoided our whole way. And so it was good for my prayer life. But it wasn't just the roads and the other drivers that terrified me. The car we were driving in was also terrifying. Because in that car, you could look out all the windows and see the beautiful countryside, or you could look right down between your feet and watch the road go by because it had rusted completely through. But it wasn't just the roads and it wasn't just the car that terrified me, it was also the stories. Because people over and over again would say, oh, be careful on that road. Because if you get in a car accident on that road, run for your life. Because if you get in a car accident on that road, people will assume because you're in a car that you're rich and they will kill you to take anything you have. So don't get in a car accident. If you do, run. And so all of these things went through my mind every day as we rode back and forth to the meetings. And one night we were coming back from the meetings and we went over a bump in the road, and as we went over the bump, boom, the lights in the car went out. And it was dark. There was no electricity in that part, so there were no street lights, there were no house lights. When I say dark, it was pitch black. We went over another bump, boom, and the lights came back on. And it happened that way with every bump over and over and over again. There was one time we went over a bump and the lights went out and there were people walking in the road and they came back on after we passed the people. I assume we didn't hit the people because that feels different. Off and on, over and over again. And finally, the lights went off and the road turned, but we didn't see it. Luckily, that was not one of the places where it was a cliff, but we ran off the road and we were stuck. And sure enough, we see 4 large men running at the car. And the other student who was in the car with me clearly hadn't heard the stories of what happens in accidents, because he's like, oh, look, there's some people, yay. And I'm terrified because not only do we have our laptops and projectors and my camera and all of these things, and here the men are running at the car. And they grab a hold of the car and they pick it up and put it back on the road. I have no question those men were angels. And the lights didn't go off again until we got back to the city. But the next day before I got in the elder's car, I looked at him and I said, one question. You know what question I asked. Because before I was going to get back into his car, I needed to know, did you fix the lights? Church family, the God of the universe loves us so much. He gave us his Bible. He gave us prophet after prophet because he wanted to communicate with us. He wanted to maintain that relationship. He wants to give us as much light as we can possibly get. Spending time in the Bible. Reading Ellen White. That's how we get light, isn't it? Would any of us get in a car where the lights didn't work? Hopefully not. But yet we do. We do day after day. Assuming we can take care of it on our own. We can't. I don't know what your relationship is like with Ellen White. Maybe somebody else quoted verses to you that were never meant for you. If so, I'm sorry. But don't allow someone else's message to take away from God's message. I believe Jesus is coming soon. As we look at the things happening around us, it's just getting crazier. This isn't the time for us to be driving in the dark.